Angela, who is the Director of Heat Response and Mitigation for the City of Phoenix, but also a colleague here in Geographical Sciences and Urban Planning. And several of our faculty suggested him for our speaker series because he has done the hat trick of academia of both being an incredibly productive and engaged thinker and scholar, and also moved into policy and had real impact in the world. And so I think he's going to talk about that today and share the important work he's doing with the City of Phoenix. So welcome, David.
Thank you, Lindsay. It is a tough start hearing about a hat trick. My wife is Canadian, and as such, all of her family is excellent hockey players. I had the chance to participate in Boxing Day hockey with them once a year. I believe Bambi on ice has been referenced. Oh my God. We'll pick a different sport next time. But thanks so much for the invitation to be here. It's an honor to get to spend some time with you. I have to give a shout out as we get started. The person who brought me to ASU is here in the room, Eric Johnston. Thank you. 10 years ago.
Only a decade or so.
Yeah, almost 10 years ago, we were with Tanya at the downtown campus and totally different world and administrative arrangement. But it's nice to be here to be in conversation with you. I'm here partially for selfish reasons in that we need to do a better job as a city government in Phoenix on the topics we'll talk about. And you all are the best and brightest thinkers on campus. So please do not be shy to provide your ideas. What I really appreciated in my time with Eric was the flexibility to think about how we can be producing scholarship that is socially relevant, which I think is very aligned with your school and the ASU mission. And I don't think we maxed out on that potential yet. I feel like I'm still learning today, after a year and a half working in this role for the city, how we can be, what the research really is that could help us in our day-to-day operations. I think we moved in that direction in our time together, but I think we still have a long way to go. And part of that is the relative infancy of the heat conversation in general across the US. Just a disclaimer to please interrupt as we go along. No sense of formality. No point is too small. I welcome your clarification and interruptions. So how many folks are residents of the city of Phoenix? 1, 2. Okay, so you two are technically my bosses as a city employee, but regardless of what your home city is, I don't know if you ever thought about this question or prompt before, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. How would you finish the sentence? My city would be doing a good job managing heat if, what would that look like? What are you expecting from your local government?
They planted more trees.
If we planted more trees, very good. And what's your name? ITT. Well, thank you. We're happy to give you a City of Phoenix heat-ready water bottle. First one to answer a question. So planting more trees, fantastic. And when we show up at community meetings, that is often the first thing we hear what folks are asking for from the city. The streets weren't all black. Streets weren't all black. Very good. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about that.
The city was providing affordable housing or vouchers or housing, period.
Love that. And tell us why that is important.
Housing means potential AC and shelter from sun and heat and everything, all the resources to
yeah, fantastic. And but we'll talk more about this as we go along, but I think not everybody would think of that type of investment on the list of heat solutions. You got to it in a second step, but I would argue that's probably the most important investment we can be making. What else?
Parks, green areas. Trees idea, but
looking at educating people about what all of these things that people have recommended, what that is and how it helps. So just educating the public about even water usage and air conditioning and how to tolerate heat differently from a person.
Love it. Public education. One of the terms we hear in some conversations is heat literacy. Building our sense of what the vocabulary is, how the programs work. I don't mean to suggest that we are effectively heat illiterate, but I like the idea that there is this specialized vocabulary. And there was one other idea.
More curriculum in parks or even like rail bus station.
Well, and maybe one more.
That was kind of connected. walking and cycling option.
Yeah, love it. Thank you all. Thank you. Fantastic. I think we're getting a sense already of the intersectionality of the heat issue. Let's switch roles and imagine that we're now a city government employee. How would we know if we're succeeding? What are the indicators we would look for to know that we're having some success managing the heat problem? Some of the suggestions feel like they are measurable, like how many trees we planted, but some of the others are a little squishier. So how would we as a city know if we're succeeding?
0 deaths
0 deaths, and what sort of deaths in particular?
from heat.
From heat. Fantastic. We'll talk about that in a moment. What else?
If the city was using less energy.
Using less energy.
Other cities started modeling what we were doing.
Oh, I like that one. Yeah, very good. People are looking to, our phone does ring from other cities from time.
Probably there are some city rankings.
Yeah, I love the idea. We've been thinking about that for a few years. Right now, the city rankings related to heat are indirectly there. Like in our lead for cities application, we might refer to some, but there's no sense yet of being the #1 heat city. But of course we are.
This may sound crazy, but if the temperature actually dropped.
Oh, the temperature. Let's bang it. Yeah,
Be nice.
I was thinking very interesting that is the 7th suggestion that came up. It wasn't at the top of the list. And there,
Piggyback on Eric was saying, I would be happy going back then if the city was creating digital twins,
and how would that help the,
basically to be able to really do the inside. So we know if the temperature goes up, goes down, we know how many deaths happen, we know, and then we can actually try to understand better.
yeah, I love it. Thinking about what our digital and analog resources are for strategies. Fantastic.
Surveys or interviews. City, neighborhoods, different satisfaction.
Yeah, who's a real survey researcher in the room? Would anyone consider themselves? So my sense is that when the city conducts a survey, convenience sampling is the only frame of mind that exists. The rigor of what it means to do a survey in city government, I think we have a ways to go, which is why we often see cities partnering with ASU. But I get a little spooked when I hear, let's survey this, let's survey that, because I'm not sure the quality of the data that we're collecting all the time. That makes me nervous. There's one other, yes.
So if you had any funds protected for residential homes or business homes to improve ACs for older things, especially for lower income places, and also window sealing and window quality, so that way you're actually trapping heat and having better cooling for spaces, especially, so you could measure it by dollars acquired for that and then dollars expended through the geographic region in the city.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, thinking about the flow, which is also how we are evaluated here at ASU. Dollars received and dollars that flow. Yeah, fantastic. Love those ideas. And I think again echo the intersectionality of the issue, and for the suggestions that we heard that we're not already thinking about, we certainly will do so. So we're going to step back a moment and talk about the evolution of why we're here talking about heat office in the city of Phoenix. I will not be offended if you say that you were not. How many people did not know that the city of Phoenix has a heat office? Yeah, so we don't have the word out fully yet. It's only been a year and a half. We have a small team. We don't have a big marketing budget, so no worries. ASU is absolutely a node on the sequence of events that led to the creation of this office. And it's a long node over many years of engagement with various touch points, including people in this room. I think the sense of what we learned over 10, 20 years between the city and ASU is captured very nicely here by my colleague, Melissa Gordaro, who works for the Knowledge Exchange for Resilience and Healthy Urban Environments Initiative. I think the biggest hurdle to cities doing better on heat is that mitigating heat is nobody's responsibility, yet it's everybody's concern. And let me give you a couple of examples of where that showed up. The city of Phoenix received a grant from the Bloomberg Foundation a number of years ago to do some prototyping activities for heat management. And one of the assumptions we wanted to test was that a city could develop a heat plan. We didn't know if that was really the case. The city of Phoenix at the time did not have any sort of heat plan, although there were some heat elements in other plans. So we asked the deputy city manager, which is the second tier of management in city government, to handpick an all-star team of city department leaders to come together and see if we could at least take a baby step toward writing a plan. Could we write a vision statement or a mission statement, something like that, that we get we identify some goals. And here we are with that all-star team and some of our ASU team. And about 10 minutes in the meeting, we just noticed it was not very comfortable. The conversation wasn't going very smoothly. And we stopped and asked how many folks had worked together before. We hadn't done any introductions. This is the handpicked all-star team. Surely they're all working together. And somebody chimed in and said, not only do we all not work together regularly, I don't even know everybody in the room. And that was a flashing red light to us that there have to be some missed opportunities for heat management if the handpicked all-star team has never even met each other before. A similar perspective from a meeting that was actually held in this room with some professional emergency managers in the area working on heat planning and strategizing. Out loud in a semi-public setting, some of the emergency management professionals in the room questioned if it was really appropriate for them to be there. Is heat part of my job? I'm the city emergency manager. Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? And if the emergency manager is asking that, who else isn't really sure if they're supposed to be there? And as we asked that type of question over time, we kept learning that people who were coming to these heat meetings were going above and beyond their job expectations to be there. It was in their extra time. Tanya had a comment or question.
Are there ever any differences in their perceived threat of heat over time? So for instance, if we're talking about a fire, that's very time bound in terms of what emergency means. But there keeps being reports coming out of like from the UN of like the heat getting really high in 2030 that came out this week. So whether it is an issue or not, it will be there everywhere. And where we are temperature wise, if you're thinking about that, won't it be increasingly becoming more emergency?
Yeah, great question. I think the conversation is thawing out a little bit. We had a big breakthrough about 2 weeks ago. I think part of so is anybody a professional emergency manager before I offend the whole field here? My sense is there's a lot of structure in the field of emergency management. There are ways things are done. It's very hierarchical. There are protocols, there are systems, people know their role in the system, and it sometimes appears to be hard to push new ideas into that system.
Yeah, so I'm not a certified emergency manager, but I am the assistant vice president for environmental health and safety, and we manage the COVID response for issue. And I work very closely with emergency managers. It is very structured, but they're used to like the U.S. government incident command system structures for things like hurricanes, like things that hit hard and fast, and they have to deal with really quick.
Absolutely, yeah,
And that's a problem.
he feels a little bit different.
It's like not part. They wouldn't think that as part of their job.
And as such, we've had this two-way sense of indifference in the United States, where cities and their emergency managers haven't been asking the federal government for help on heat. They haven't been writing about heat and hazard mitigation plans. This is a big blanket statement that has many of exceptions. And the federal government hasn't been providing resources. The number of dollars FEMA has allocated for specific heat-focused projects ever is.
No, I was gonna ask a question.
Your first word, you got it. No, zero. No. How did you get it out of the water bottle?
Is there, have they ever asked federal government to help on coal?
There are some interesting analogs for cold. I don't know the answer to your specific question, but as we look around the country at what cities and other sorts of institutions are doing for cold, we ask ourselves, why doesn't the same exist for heat? Whether it's rules, whether it's infrastructure, it seems like we're a little farther ahead in cold management than heat management. That's my sense, but it's my job to ask and beg for more resources for heat, so I might be a little biased.
No, I'm just saying that if they allow it in one domain, even if it's a chronic problem, like cold, then that actually opens the door for heat.
Absolutely. I don't disagree with the point that heat and cold and air pollution, they are a little bit different type of hazard, but I can say when we were out, no exaggeration, troubleshooting a generator down by the Human Services campus last year, adjusting flaps on a temporary tent that's out there, right? It felt very much like the types of things we see FEMA do for emergency response and activating the Red Cross, National Guard, and so on.
In an almost cynical way, one of the reasons we might see cold responses more advanced is that you look at the amount of economic activity that has been affected by cold versus the amount of, heat existed in parts of the country without many people, without money.
Without political clout. Yeah.
And so there, I'm being extremely cynical here that If-
Like it.
it was actually impacting, economic activity. I think.
And
we're
we do
doing it
believe
better.
there are significant economic impacts of heat, but we haven't done a very good job packaging up that story yet collectively.
Then you would have a finance.
So this conversation has been percolating over years that a governance gap for heat exists. Who's the problem owner in local government? We heard about heat deaths. These are horrible numbers reported by the Maricopa County Department of Public Health. We have the best system anywhere in the country of tracking how many people die from heat. And as you can see, the numbers are moving exactly in the wrong direction. The 2022 number is an undercount because not all reporting is completed yet for last year. We are getting these numbers on the same, in the same ballpark as the number of homicides that happen in the county each year. And if we think about the scale of resources that are mobilized to prevent and investigate homicides, it would dwarf the heat investment.
So can you give us a definition of what a heat associated death?
Yeah, it's a great question. In the Maricopa County system, well, I'll say, number one, I recognize we're talking about some sensitive topics and some of you might have had personal experience or family members that have had an unfortunate outcome. And as we talk about it, we're gonna be talking about numbers and it'll be a little bit it's not gonna feel very personal for a few moments, and I apologize for that. To answer your question, there are a number of ways people can get in trouble for heat. There are certainly direct heat stroke cases where the body itself, our core temperature becomes too high, organ failure occurs and so on. That turns out not to be a very big piece of the pie for heat associated deaths in Phoenix or elsewhere. The types of incidents that we see more often are an adverse outcome where heat is a contributing factor. So maybe we are out hiking, starting not to feel very good, our heart is going a little bit too hard, maybe we have some sort of heart incident where heat was a contributing factor because our body's working so hard to get blood out to our skin away from our internal organs to cool off. So it'll appear first and foremost on a death certificate as a heart attack. But with our advanced surveillance system, we can do more understanding to see that heat was a contributing factor in the chain of events that led there. The single most common item in at least this in this portion of the record is methamphetamine overdose in the presence of environmental heat. That is contributor number one here. Now, it's not, I'm not saying it's the majority case, but that's the most common type of case.
Is mortality really the main vector that you're looking at? Because it's not just dying from the heat, but being impacted over time, especially if we're looking at our lower income, lower
Yeah.
resource.
Yeah, great question, and thanks for bringing that up. The answer is no, but heat associated deaths are the indicator that some people, I can't remember who brought it up, I think you did.
Yeah.
It is we think it's a pretty high quality indicator that's reliably reported. But for every one of these cases, there are 10 to 40 times as many people who require some sort of formal medical treatment. And there are hundreds to thousands times that many people who have some adverse impact on their quality of life, whether it's I'm worried about paying the air conditioning bill or my ice cream melted on my bike ride home from the grocery store. All of those are in our frame of mind for what the heat problem is. And it is a problem that I don't know that any city has really defined very well. And as such, we get an awkward mismatch sometimes, I think, between solutions and goals when we haven't defined what the goal is. Like we heard about tree planting earlier, and I'm all for tree planting, and we're planting lots of trees. But tell me, is that first and foremost on the list for moving these bars? Maybe, but we would have to think about it a little bit. Yeah, some bad statistics there. Phoenix has the highest rate of all the municipalities in Maricopa County for certain reasons, where certain programs are held. So we've got the governance gap. We've got public health impacts from heat rising rapidly in the community. I think this graphic would actually parallel the number of academic publications on heat that have come out of ASU over the same, which is unfortunate. And the future is a warmer one. There's three factors that I think have all conspired together to motivate action in our local government. Governance gap, health indicators moving in the wrong direction, and the future is a warmer one. And majority of Phoenix City Council would have no problem saying that on the public record, that we're headed into a warmer future.
I mean, I've seen things on homelessness. Crisis like. This, that, is that.
Yes.
as well.
Yes, thank you. I didn't know when to introduce that into the conversation, but now seems like a very good time. Our estimates are that somebody who's unhoused is 300 to 400 times more likely to experience heat associated death than the rest of the population. As that pool has grown, again, I know I'm quantifying real people and their stories, but as that pool has grown, unfortunately, it's a math problem that suggests move more people into high risk group. These numbers are going to move in the wrong direction. That's not an excuse. When the public health community says every heat associated death is preventable, they don't say, except if you're experiencing a housing affordability crisis, or except if you have a lot of people living on the street. I have not heard those disclaimers, and nor do I think they would be appropriate. But yes, we do believe.
You say 300 times more, not 300% more?
Yes, and in fact, we had a little bit of there's a commentary. I think there's a news story in Science coming out this week where I had the chance to contribute to an interview, and the story came out and the author reported 300 to 400%. And I responded and said, I'm sorry, but it is times. And he went and rechecked the math. He couldn't believe it either. It is staggering. It's no surprise for somebody who's outside most of the day, every day, and likely experiencing some other physical and mental health challenges. The risk is very, very, very disproportionately high. And as such, it focuses what our time and money should be spent on. If moving these numbers is our goal. It's really, really staggering. The math is a little squishy because while we have pretty good numerators, these are the numerators, and these can be divided up into different groups. The denominator for the number of unsheltered people in the community is, there is some error there. We have one estimate every January that's collected from the point in time survey. I don't know if anyone has a chance to participate in that data collection effort. The error bounds on the denominator might be 50% in either direction, but even still, we're talking about hundreds times higher.
Well, the reason I ask is because the Knowledge Exchange for Resilience, the work you know very well, was talking about mobile homes being the greatest predictor of someone doing this. Feels like now there's three categories. There's unhomed people, there's mobile homes, and then there's sort of everyone else.
Yeah, I think that's
There's really sort of a power law distribution almost between those groups. And if so, it changes how we approach the problem.
absolutely, yeah. And I also agree with the current statistics about mobile and manufactured homes. I think it's 10, 15 times higher. When we publish papers in environmental health literature, if we find 1% higher risk factor, sometimes that's a big deal. And here we're talking about many, many more zeros. So yeah, mobile and manufactured homes, but the absence of reliable home dwarfs that, I would argue. So yeah, sorry for a bit of a downer, but we think we can do something about it, which is why we're having this conversation. Just another note on the milestone, the academic community was certainly sensing that there was an opportunity here. Here's a commentary that our U of A colleague Lad Keith led with Sarah Miro from ASU, synthesizing this story together that local governments can and should do more related to heat. One of the idea was to have people whose job it is to manage heat. And we have that now in the city of Phoenix. This is the city org chart as of a month ago. And here we are a box along with all the other 30 some departments like housing and water services. This is the only city in the United States that has an org chart that looks like this, where you can find a team whose job it is to focus on heat. There are a few cities who have used philanthropic money to make an appointment of one person as a chief heat officer. You may have seen that in the news. Los Angeles has also internalized that process in their city budget now. So they have a publicly funded heat officer. We have a publicly funded team working on heat. As an aside, we just lost one of our deputy city managers who actually oversaw the heat office. She went to state environmental quality, appointed by the governor. So all of her teams had to get reassigned elsewhere. And it's quite an interesting exercise for people who think about public administration and governance. Where do you reassign the heat team and all the other ones within the organizational structure? And perhaps because of our conversation here, you see that we've lined up with housing, human services, and homeless solutions. I don't know how intentional that was, but I do think it is one of the good alignments that we could have had.
How did this compare, going back to the full discussion, like in Boston, for example? They had trucks for shoveling snow, like it was a part of the infrastructure, it wasn't considered an emergency. Cold response, they just, every year it's gonna snow, so we got this. And we got a lot, and so I'm wondering, how does this compare to cities like that?
Yeah, my sense is, so we had the chance to have a participate in a project between Tempe and Buffalo a couple of years ago. And we had the snowplow fleet manager in the room, and my sense was everything that was routine for him in cold management was not routine for Tempe and Phoenix in heat management. Like we just hadn't got there yet. And why that's the case, I don't know. And I think it's quite interesting. But yeah, I agree. I'm not sure that there's a cold officer in Boston or Minneapolis. And I think it could be argued that part of our job is to put ourselves out of business when everybody else has the heat literacy, when everybody else is thinking about heat as part of planning processes, we would no longer add value. I think we're a long way from being there, but it is possible that we could get there.
I'm curious, have you been following the OSHA rulemaking on heat?
Yeah.
Is that's been straggling and not really moving very much.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. There are, and for those who know this domain better, please chime in. The regulatory environment for occupational heat safety across the US is extremely heterogeneous. The rules in California are much stricter than they are in Arizona, if there even are any rules at all in Arizona, which could be debated. And the Biden administration is concerned about this and would like to see our workers more uniformly protected from heat across the whole country. They solicited feedback from everyone, I suppose, last January it was quite some time ago. And that was right as we were getting started with the city heat office. So we were not involved in that process directly, but human resources did respond, and they had some concerns. They wanted to ensure that any rulemaking process would reflect the climatic diversity of the United States. That we could imagine a scenario in which a 95-degree day is considered dangerous for workers and we need to impose certain protections. And we're not going to determine today what the right threshold is, but a rule like that, which might make a ton of sense in Boston, really be costly for the Phoenixes of the world. So I think our human resource department asked some questions about how would this be operationalized, but I haven't heard anything beyond that.
Yeah, I just think it's funny that we can't even protect, like, we have OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which is designed to protect employees, and we can't even make rules to protect employees. So usually it's based on the institution to develop their own.
And I can say even within city government, when I approach other department heads about this, there's a little sensitivity that seems to creep in, like the suggestion that if you're asking me this question, do you not think we're doing a good job right now? And how to approach that has been a little, it's still feeling
One
not.
of the things that comes to my mind is when you compare the European model. So one of the things I go, when I take students from this side of the ocean, the other side, I say everything you call benefit over here is called a right. Like things like vacation, parental leave, so yeah, healthcare, I mean, but it's really interesting, like even parental leave or vacation, right? And when you look at how in the US, a lot of this regulation, including safety, is actually industry regulated. So the industry self-regulates, as for example, the union for, I don't know, contract workers will then push a sort of say policy, but on the level of the industry self-regulated, usually unions will be playing a role rather than having, which is mostly you find in the European model, simply because we're talking about New Zealand just before, you have actually legislation that that you have to provide.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll pick a specific example of this in a moment. Yeah, the working through the layers.
So the principles are dramatically different in how this regulation happens.
Yeah, I agree. So the formal mechanism that created the heat office was in the city budget in 2021, 2022. The city of Phoenix budget process for next year is just starting up right now. There are 14, about a dozen community budget hearings coming up that everyone's invited to participate in. When that conversation happened a couple of years ago, it was part of a larger climate package that had 14 new positions across 3 departments, including 5 new urban foresters in the Parks Department. This isn't all in the heat office. Money for trees, money for water systems, money for updating our tree inventory. At the time, this was the budget item that received the most positive public comment through the budget hearing process. It wasn't the one that had the most comments, and I'll leave you to guess what that was, but there was a lot of public support to make this this investment. So the city created a heat office budgetarily July 1st, 2021. We didn't start hiring anyone until that fall. I'll come back to this question in just a moment. I'll show you what the roles are that comprise the heat office today. We have a tree person.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah, please.
Can you tell us what he is?
No, I'll save that.
Okay,
Yeah.
you really mean extreme heat, don't you?
I'll save, yeah. I don't want to corner your thinking. Yeah, but it is great, like, I think that question is a perfect representation of where we are in thinking about it. We're not even really sure all the time what we need. And I think that's fun and interesting and challenging. So we have 2 people who think about long-term cooling strategies, trees and non-trees. One person who thinks about the short-term measures. Then we have a couple folks who are managing specific projects and administrative support. So what do you think those jobs should do? And we got some of that already in our metrics conversation. Like, how do we orient our work? How do we start? There's no playbook for what these people should do. Does anyone have any recommendations about what a priority might be for us or a governing principle?
Having some community input and public participation. Allocating.
Love it. And for you, on the theme of public participation, this is a shade umbrella that a local artist designed on it that our office in Public Service. It can also be used in the brain, although its function is really meant to be for shade. Yeah, so public participation engagement, love it.
Wonder, living in Phoenix and the way that selfie outside saying so maybe almost inverting. Not to say that we don't want public comment, but also to really make.
Love it. Love it.
This is kind of a operational, like a functional one rather than aspirational. But when you were showing all of the different offices that exist in here, make sure that there are shared measurements or shared agreements on what you're measuring. So that way you can articulate it across, whether you're having emphasis of 2 or 3 of those pods, or if it's everyone, but that way you're not measuring different things or having different goals. You don't have to be exactly the same, but you need enough shared that you're actually all interpreting the same vision. Then it's tailored to what your primary responsibilities.
Love it. And yes, I can think of a few examples. This is actually close to your question. Okay, what is got? Oh, one more, and then I'll share with you the ones we've dreamt up so far. But 2 more.
I think having it go along the priorities of who's actually affected most deeply by the leadership, rather than one size fits all strategy.
Well, you wouldn't say that about coal. Coal affects everybody. I mean, you wouldn't not clean some streets, the other.
It's different, it's not the same thing. It's there in cold, there's the same deal with unsheltered people. I lived in Minneapolis for, people who don't have houses freeze to death, just like people here have heat, and it's associated with the same sort of physical and mental health issues. So there are some effects of cold that plowing the streets has nothing to do with.
Right.
Making a better environment for.
I think it is. I don't know if tree planting and snow plowing can be considered equivalent, but it is absolutely the case if we are considering planting lots of trees on some streets and not other streets, and snow plowing Well, I think we would, the goal would be like, let's get all the streets flooded. Maybe there's something about how the whole system works and people, I don't know if it's a fair.
But also you see how the position of the, when you look at the organizational chart. The heat office is basically with anything that has to do with vulnerability. So heat equals, same thing if you had back in, my case was Milwaukee, right?
Right.
Potato,
Yeah.
right? If you had this, the cold office, right, or let's call it the blizzard office. And the blizzard office is there talking about infrastructure, which means clean the streets, which that is, when the ET is driving his, Mercedes to point A to point B. BMW, sorry. He's affected by that. He's a very different case. So it's interesting that when we think of code, we think about the operation level that affects, certain part of the population. When you think of heat, you're shoveled right there with, public housing, with homelessness, with actually vulnerability. It's really interesting.
It's a nice observation.
So, when you talk about the principles and priorities, when you're looking at solutions, is working, I guess, across the different, overuse the word priorities, because I think about tree planting, that's gonna take more water. We have water conservation as well, so I guess working interdisciplinary across the other conservatory type priorities, because you can't say, okay, we're gonna plant more trees, well, I'm gonna take more water in our people, or have the air misters. And so just thinking about making sure that they're aligned, I guess goes kind of back to the measurement piece.
Yeah, I don't remember what it was in my earlier work with Eric, but I certainly felt, I was never sure how much of a specialist I was as an academic. And at some point, we had a collective learning that there are real specialists in the academic world, and then there are more connector types. Like, that's okay. And there are people who are connector types and need to be good at that. And I'm not claiming that I am good at that, but I think that is a job for the heat office, is to be the connector type, so we can have these conversations across.
It's okay, we can speak for he is a connector type that's good at it, so.
So here's what we have come up with so far as the priorities and principles that would shape our work. And I think they resonate with what you all have suggested. We have 8 of them, and please criticize them. We think of our work in 2 big buckets: long-term strategies to cool the city and make it more comfortable, and short-term strategies to protect public health when it's hot. Not everything perfectly fits into that organizational framework, but it's served our purposes thus far. Learning about costs and benefits and communicating them. Heat is costly, but nobody's calculated how costly it is, with a few exceptions. Let's do that. Let's think about what the metrics are, or even what the big issue is and how to define it. Can we improve our programs and services and evaluate them? Evaluating how any of this is working and what impact it's making is really, it seems really hard, and there's very close to 0 academic papers on that topic. Serving a coordinating role locally and regionally. Tempe is downwind of Phoenix some to most of the time. So Tempe is very dependent on what Phoenix does for how hot it is in Phoenix. So heat, like so many other environmental challenges, doesn't know municipal boundaries, so we need to be regionally coordinated. It's also the case if Tempe decides to have really strict regulations for building cool buildings of the future, maybe that puts them at a competitive disadvantage relative to Phoenix, and that wouldn't be desirable from a regional perspective as well. We try to be engaged with the emerging national and international groups working on heat, and then we claim that these last 2 are our pillars, which I was glad were the first 2. Some version of these was the first 2 that were suggested. This idea of being responsive to the community and advancing. The term we use is heat equity, although some people, when we say heat equity, they think about shareholders in the financial world. So I don't know that heat equity quite resonates yet. Maybe we need to tweak that. But this idea of fairness, of disproportionate impacts, is certainly behind a lot of what we're thinking about. I will say on this one, some of the feedback we get from the community, and you can find some of it on social media, is something like, come on, city, we've told you for 20 years, through 1,000 meetings we've attended and 50 surveys we've done, and we've told you what to do, just go do it already. And I think we're now in a better position to be doing that, but I don't think we can be completely disconnected from the community as we do. So there's a little bit of a balancing act there and what the right amount and form is of this, because we have so much historical input that hasn't been acted upon. So I wanted to share a little bit of what some of the programs are in the hopes that we can help each other think about how to make them better and measure their impact. We wrote the city's first heat response plan for last summer. Yes, sir.
Was there a principal slide that I missed?
No, yeah, so
And the reason
part
why I
of
asked,
the vocabulary work. Somewhere hidden in some of these are some sense of principles, I think, like here maybe, but we have never really sat down as a team and said, what is a principle and what are ours? We've said, these are the ideas that are pushing us, and somewhere in them are priorities and principles, we think, but please expand for us.
so we have the charter that's right outside that says ASU takes a fundamental responsibility for our communities. If someone were to die because of heat exposure, who's responsible for that? You mentioned earlier that the problem of heat in general is a hot potato that everyone's passing around. But has anyone said, you know what, the social contract says that sort of anyone within this region, we as a government have a responsibility for, therefore any failures are failure. Like, are you talking in that language or?
We are starting to.
Okay.
Yeah, I've certainly responded to some reporters, and I've said, and you all, I've been now challenged by city council members that maybe we got a little bit ahead of our skis. If we're not seeing the indicators moving in the other direction, I am failing at my job. And as we talked about, it's a very intersectional issue. I don't have my hands on all the levers for housing affordability, but if we can't show progress in some domain, we're failing as individuals and a team, and certainly as local government. So yes, I think that is the type of conversation we're having. I asked ChatGPT over the weekend to write a vision and mission statement for the heat office, and it was really good, I thought, and it spoke to these elements. So you might see that here on the website.
It's really, really good. For this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it was. I was blown away.
Yeah, because it takes actually the structure of it. Let me ask you a quick question. So when you think about the governance of the office,
Mhm.
we can stratify in two different levels. And maybe I will use the wrong words, but just to, one I would call risk. That is the person who is on the streets or exposed that, and then you have the second level, which I would call vulnerability. Which is the person who has housing, but insulation, cooling systems, provision of energy, all the things that need to be working are extremely, let's say, people extremely vulnerable.
Mhm.
And so when you think about the governance of the office, is the understanding of heat response mostly working on so I'll put three levels. One is the public infrastructure like schools and so forth of the city. The second one, people at risk that basically, and then you have the third level, which is the people with vulnerable situations.
Yeah, I would say all,
Okay.
but I don't know that anybody knows anywhere how much we should be doing in each of those different levels, as you said, and that is. I think our sense is that we're trying to move forward on a lot of them all at once, and I can't honestly tell you today if that is the right approach. For every hour that we spend handing out water bottles, we could be spending an hour thinking about strengthening the cooling ordinance that protects renters, and I genuinely don't know how to balance that right now. Last summer, we led the creation of the city's first heat response plan. This is a lowercase p plan, not a big community engagement process behind this. It was more of an internal strategy document. But this was the first time we had ever written down as a city what all of our programs and services are related to heat response. So the first time we even have a chance to see what the universe is, then we might be able to think about making different investments. And we interpreted that there were 6 big buckets of programs. The city had about 30 programs that we considered part of heat response. Everything from directly handing out water bottles, and I'll show you a slide of that in a moment, to operating splash pads and city pools, which is a very different part of the heat response problem, but it is a critical cooling asset for many community members. So I'm going to give just a couple of examples of initiatives in the heat response plan to hopefully help us think about how they might or might not be better. We interpreted it as our job to build situational awareness in City Hall of what's happening with heat. It's actually inspired by what happened with COVID. The city started sending out a weekly report of COVID impacts in the community and to our workforce. I got a lot of eyeballs, a lot of conversation. So we said, well, let's do something like that for heat. We haven't had heat literacy. I think if we had polled city department heads, how many people are dying from heat in Phoenix, the error rate would have been very high. What are the hottest neighborhoods? I don't know that that would have existed either. So we've pulled together data from a bunch of different sources to generate this weekly report. Just to give you an example, we map where the 911 calls are related to heat. And we use this information to shape where our outreach teams go and think about what else is happening in some of these neighborhoods where there are 911 calls. What's a bit of a conundrum, which I think exists in a lot of public health evaluation work, is if we are doing our job, it will ultimately look like we're visiting the wrong places because we'll have worked where there are no more problems in the community. Or if heat warnings are successful, it will look like heat warnings are issued on the wrong days because there are no deaths or illnesses on those days. So we're still wrapping our minds around that. Some of you who have great eyes could see that one of the little hotspots here is Sky Harbor Airport. And this was not known to anyone in city government before the weekly heat report came out. And aviation has been very receptive to talk to us about that. It appears to be tarmac workers, not visitors getting off the plane and being overwhelmed by the heat immediately. And this is where the union conversation and the industry self-regulation comes in. Many of the people are, it's our understanding thus far, many of the people who are comprised in this hotspot are not city employees, but are Southwest American Delta employees. And that is a long conversation to be had about what any changes might look like. I did observe when I flew to Detroit for the winter holidays this year, we pulled up to the gate, they came on a bitterly cold day, and they said, some version of there are rules here at the Detroit airport for how much time our workers can be spending outside. They need to go in and take breaks to warm up. Hang in there for a few moments. As soon as we can get our staff back out here so they're not freezing, we'll get you off the airplane. And I've never heard a version of that in a hot city. I don't know if anybody else.
Well, that's what I was saying earlier, like ASU has it for people who work in the field. You work 15 minutes in hot direct sun, then you take a 10-minute break. Things to cool off, but it's not an OSHA calculated thing. It's an institution or organization specific.
And I'm sure American and Delta and Southwest will have something to say if we're going to suggest it be 50% more costly in terms of personnel hours to run their operations in the summer. Now it's very costly to have somebody not be able to do their work because they got sick from heat.
Let's say the universities in general are very generous.
Oh, yeah.
I mean.
Yeah.
As an employer, it's a good place to work.
But it's also more complicated to take a wet bulb thermometer and actually determine humidity versus temperature and actually determine. There's best practices of what you should do, but that takes talent if someone to actually do it. And it's a little bit more cumbersome than saying it's freezing outside, it's negative, whatever.
Yeah. And my sense is the heat literacy in the workforce and what is wet bulb globe temperature, we're a long ways.
But in many cases, I would say the customer, it's actually doesn't really care. Because if he's waiting for you, one of his BMW, you know, with air conditioning, ready to, and at the airport for me to get out. And, you know, so I'm anxious because I want to get the ride on, and off we go. Right?
Yeah,
So-
there is absolutely
so
a tension.
it's really interesting. We don't see the workers there. And
They're
that's a
visible.
really interesting,
Very visible.
yeah. It's a really interesting aspect.
Do you have data for all the cities around?
Not the 911 data, that's a City of Phoenix system, although I do believe those data exist, but I haven't looked for them or interacted with them. Let me just highlight a couple of programs. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wonder if you have staff, like this is something I wanted the state to do, is if they could just post every day during the summer what what they think the extremes are gonna be for the city, so people could actually check and be like, oh, today's gonna be really hot with lots of humidity.
So the Phoenix National Weather Service office has, going back to Eric's suggestion before about we'll know we're succeeding if other jurisdictions want to mirror what we're doing. The Phoenix National Weather Service heat page, one, it exists, which not many cities have. They have a dedicated heat dashboard, and they're always interested in learning what metrics to put up there. They're trying out some new probabilistic information now. And the Federal Weather Service is encouraging other jurisdictions to think about such a model. Wet bulb globe temperature itself is a little bit of a complicated issue in the dry city, so I don't know that I'm ready to endorse it as a metric on the website today. If we could talk about it.
You'd have to monitor humidity levels. I'm not, it could be like, if you're within this range of the humidity at this temperature, you should be taking breaks every.
In
sun.
the European context, it's very common to have more complex biometeorological indices as part of the day-to-day vocabulary, like heat index might be on the East Coast or humidex might be, and here it's just not part of the story. Let me give a couple of examples of programs. I'll skip ahead a few slides here because we are getting short on time, 1 o'clock. Perfect. And then, yeah, then we'll hopefully have a few time for questions and reaction. I'll pick a couple here that I think are very interesting from a measurement standpoint or show the value of creating a heat office. Nothing special about me and our team, but just having people whose job it is to have this conversation. So we are out on the streets. We were out on the streets a lot last summer, about 1,200 people hours, staff and volunteers contributed to do 3 things. Distribute supplies like hats, water bottles, cooling towels, to share information about community cooling resources, like where the public cooling centers are, where are water fountains. A lot of people are new to homelessness or new to homelessness in this area. And we had many conversations where somebody might be living in their vehicle, in the parking lot of a community center that they didn't realize was open for them to go in and cool. So good connection there. But right, little lingering lunch. This was the big value last year when we were having our preseason planning conversations to write the heat plan. We were sitting with the deputy director of homeless solutions, and he said, David, this is all well and good, love the program, but if somebody asks you a real question like, where can I go for a detox, or how do I get my housing voucher, or any number of those questions, what is your team going to say? And I had no fumbling through a non-answer, and he said, how about this? How about we take our team members and put them out with you on every shift? Brilliant idea, and it worked beautifully. I really have no idea how this all would have happened successfully last year without them there. Of the roughly 3,000 engagements we had, more than 300 turned into a continuing conversation with those staff members, which I think is a really good throughput and works toward ultimately the important outcomes. The water bottle is good, housing is great, and anything we can do to make a step in that direction is fantastic. And certainly a lot of frustration, a lot of difficult experiences out there as well. But I hate to use a sports analogy for really dire circumstances people are in, but by swinging at a lot of pitches, by having thousands and thousands of engagements, we were able to hit the ball a few times, and in some cases, some home runs. And the person who's headed into shelter that night is much less likely to show up in the other statistics. We also distributed a bunch of supplies to community groups. We know the city's reputation isn't perfect in all circles. We actually go out of our way to acknowledge that while we do have a logo on, that we are not the police. We have that conversation very explicitly when we go into places, but even still, the bird carries a little bit of weight and reputational baggage. There are 50 nonprofits who do some other version of this work, and we were very happy to support them with some supplies as well. The city of Phoenix has a cooling ordinance. I don't know how many folks are aware of this. Tempe, I think, has one as well. If you're renting and your building cannot be cooled to those temperatures, the city will take action. A question, so I'm going back to what is heat? The question we've been asked by city council folks is, why are these the numbers? And we cannot find that answer. And it could be really consequential for, right, if it was 81 or 83. So we're on the hunt for that. There's a rumor that certain city housing facilities could only be cooled to these thresholds when the ordinance was first passed, and we couldn't hold anybody else accountable to something that we couldn't meet. But in thinking about, so play on your question before here, and I know we're getting to the end. So what is heat, and what are the boundaries of it, and what is our work? Certainly, these conversations about temperature measurement techniques and what the cool materials are, that is certainly part of our work. But I think that this type of work is really an important part of the portfolio as well that we would describe. I'm not a social worker. I don't know how to create a successful shelter. But if you were to ask me what was the most important heat investment the city made last year, I think this is my leading candidate, a new shelter with day and night capacity for 200 people. We're running the analysis now, and I think we will show very clearly that folks who were here were highly, highly protected from heat associated death. And the return on investment when we use federal value for statistical life is going to be off the charts. And I find that a very interesting position to be in as somebody trained in environmental science and climatology. This is, we never learned about what this is, and it's really important part of the heat portfolio. And then to be a little controversial, because I know there are different feelings about community policing. It's also possible that this was a really big part of the heat success story last year. While methamphetamine overdose in the presence of environmental heat is the most common type of case we will read about in the records, fentanyl is in there as well at a pretty good number. And anything we're doing that removes fentanyl from the streets probably is helpful for heat, although I don't know how to tell that story very quantitatively. It's also the case that the very same people that we are talking to here are involved in some of these behaviors. And how do we navigate that in parks where moms want to be sure that their kids are safe and dads want to be sure their kids are safe? Like, yeah, there are layers of complication. To wrap up, I'll just highlight, I know we've talked more about the short-term strategies, but we are thinking long-term as well. There's a lot of money available for tree planting right now, whether it's COVID money being repurposed into tree projects or Inflation Reduction Act money. There's a lot of it, and we are trying to shape and mold how it gets put into the community. We helped successfully argue for $6 million of American Rescue Plan Act funding to go toward tree planting in Phoenix. That dwarfs the current tree planting budget by approximately an order of magnitude. We have different tools at our fingertips for thinking about tree equity, which neighborhoods, which particular street segments. Here's one of the resources you can check out. We don't love this tool. We like it. We use it a little bit, but we don't love it. We're working with ASU to think about the city's own tree inventory, mapping important factors that were mentioned before, like where are the invasives, where are trees that have root damage potential. A lot of good ASU collaboration, including on the cool pavement program, which we didn't talk about other than one comment before, have all the streets not be black. Phoenix has painted more miles of city streets white than any other city in North America. And if it is succeeding is a more complicated story than we have time to say, to go into today. Tease that the single greatest benefit might be that the pavement itself lasts longer when the coating is on top of it.
I'd say it's 11 degrees cooler when it's painted white.
Yeah.
The surface. So that is a little different heat literacy here. Yeah, so it's much better. And recognize I'm opening the can of worms here a little bit. If you were to walk on the cool pavement, your feet are much less likely to be burned than on the asphalt, but your body might actually cook a little more quickly than it would on traditional asphalt instead of one into your body. So
What about parking lots? Does that get included in this measurement?
there's only been one parking lot done. Parking lots, especially the parking lots around Phoenix, of which there are many that are hardly ever used, I think is maybe the best candidate for the cool pavement coating. But there's only been one done on a pilot, maybe two, a pilot sense. Conversation to be had about cool pavement, new paper out about cool pavement that explains some of these nuances. This is ASU work here. The city has committed in the 6 figures to ASU for evaluating the cool pavement program. A very sizable investment there. We really are behind on cool roof work. There are lots of benefits to painting roofs white and using different coatings, and we're way behind there. Don't have time for that yet. And here are the questions that or the discussion prompts I had for us, how we can work together and some of these other topics here, which we've done a wonderful job talking about already. I've used even more than our allocated time. I'm happy to stay around for questions, but thank you for the great conversation.